I'm Jack Jordan, former superintendent of Northside School District, and today we have with us a part of a pioneering family in Northside. We welcome Lon Taylor to our studio and to talk about the history of Northside from his vantage point. Lon is a longtime resident of this community and grew up in this area and grew up in the schools. And Lon, welcome. And let's tell us about your family and how they came to Northside, and just take us through your life.
Well, thank you. I'll do the best that I can. My family actually moved out in the area which is now known as Callaghan, Culebra area during 1946-47. And they settled a community that was basically a rural area. It hadn't been incorporated into the city, nor did it have its own school district. It was pretty much off by itself. It was a segregated community primarily made up of African Americans who settled this particular community. Well, from what I understand, and from as things have been passed on, back as far as 1991, Mrs. Dolores Linton came to that area, and she found out that there were kids who had to go at least 12 miles to a school, elementary school called Dunbar, which was 12 miles from this area towards the west part of San Antonio. And she decided to set up classrooms in order to educate the kids that were from this community. Well, these classrooms became what's been known as Paradise Cove. Now, Paradise Cove was a bar, and it was a bar that on Saturday nights they would have dances, parties, receptions, and things of this nature. But through the week, she was able to convince the owner to allow her to start teaching kids classroom education. The grades started at 1 through 7. Well, in 1946, she had petitioned what was then known as the Leon Valley District. She had petitioned to have some funding to educate these kids. Well, it didn't go over as well as she expected, so she was able, however, to get some old Army barracks to establish her classrooms away from the Paradise Cove bar, which the bar was later torn down. But she was able to get these old Army barracks set up and started 2 classrooms. The grades were again 1 through 7, but as kids began to enroll, she started teaching grades comparable to whatever their age category was at the time. Well, around 1951, the Northside Independent School District finally incorporated that area within their school system, and a new structure was built, which is known as West San Antonio Heights Elementary School. It was constructed around 1951-1952. It was a 4-room classroom, had 4 teachers, and it housed approximately 150 students, grades 1 through 8. Now, these 4 individual teachers, one was named Mrs. Dolores Linton, one teacher, Miss Doris Scott, and Mr. Marvin Ellison. And for the life of me, I could not remember Mr. Edmondson, who was actually the principal of the school. Can't remember his first name, but he was actually the principal of the school. In some instances, you had one teacher teaching 2 grades, 1 classroom, or one teacher in some instances teaching 3 grades in 1 classroom. But however, the setting was a situation where, because of segregation, we were unable to go to some of the other schools that were within that district. So you had to make do. And that's when Mrs. Linton decided to kind of forego the old, well, if we don't have it, we can't make anything good of it. She did what she had, and some good things came of it. Now, one of the things that I remember the most is during 1966, that was basically when the desegregation within the Northside Independent School District took place. And I was part of the group that integrated Pat M. Neff High School down here on Evers Road. And that was not only just a traumatic experience, but it was a good learning experience, because you have to remember that during the segregated times, people were unfamiliar with each other, and integration was to remedy that. But before it could remedy that, all the stereotype it encountered had to be taken care of or resolved. And that was that learning experience that we all had to go through. Once I stayed at Pat M. Neff for 1 year, they built another junior high school called Saul Ross. And then I transferred to Saul Ross High School, which is located off of Callaghan Road. And that fed into Holmes, Oliver Wendell Holmes High School, which I attended in the 9th through 12th grades. And this would have been the years of 1967 through 1971, at which time I was an active participant in the sports. We enjoyed basketball. I played football, ran track, but basketball was one of the things I enjoyed the most. Had good teammates, good experiences with that. Now, as far as my family goes, I have one younger sister and 2 older brothers, and all are participants and members within the Northside community. My oldest brother, Lon Taylor, he attended John Marshall High School. He graduated in 1964-65 era. He went 1 year to San Antonio College, but during that time the war was at its peak, and he was drafted into the military sent to Vietnam. He's currently a Purple Heart recipient. He's a veteran. He's been working for the United States Postal Service for over 35 years. And he's on the verge of retirement as well. My second brother, Lincoln Taylor, also attended John Marshall High School. His interest lied with academics and sports. He was a pretty good football player, baseball player as well. He went on to graduate in 1967, and he went on to Prairie View A&M down in Prairie View, Texas, where he graduated with an industrial engineering degree. He later after graduation, he moved to Los Angeles, California, where he worked for Hughes Aircraft, and he's currently working for Northrop, and he is an aerospace engineer for Northrop. My youngest sister, however, she's still in San Antonio. She graduated from Holmes High School, 1974-75. She attended UTSA and is currently for the San Antonio Independent School District. She's taught there, and she's now teaching young teachers how to teach. So she's been in that field for over 20 years as well. My mother, Nettie Taylor, she actually was one of the first presidents of the PTA for West San Antonio Heights. She's been an active participant in the community. She one of the stories that a lot of the old students from West San Antonio Heights remembers about her is that we came from a low financial income environment, but it was basically very rich in its community support and its support for the schools, because education was high on the list. So all the people within the community did whatever they could to support Mrs. Linton and the rest of the teachers at West San Antonio Heights. Some kids went to school and they didn't have as much as others. So what my mother, Nettie Taylor, would do is that she would make hamburgers, and she would sell those hamburgers for the most part for a nickel a piece. And when she started running out of meat, she would scramble the meat so she could make more hamburgers out of whatever meat she had. And as far as the kids were concerned, it was still a hamburger, scrambled meat or not. And she gave them a price that they had that was affordable to them. She didn't give it to them.
But they couldn't turn it down.
But they couldn't turn it down because it was affordable. And I guess you would say that was one of the first lunch programs that was within the district. So, you know, there was always room for someone else to help, and people provided that help as best they could under all the adverse circumstances. Anyway, she also became a substitute teacher. When teachers were out, she would substitute because she was a graduate of Hudson-Tillotson University, or Hudson-Tillotson College at that time, up in Austin, Texas. Yeah.
A Methodist school, I
That's
think,
correct.
right?
That's correct.
Oh.
And so she was able to help out as a substitute teacher in certain times. She later went on after the school closed down and became a pre-kindergarten, and she was one of the teachers. Under her principal was Mr. Viriel, I believe.
Eduardo Villarreal.
There,
Yeah.
that's right. And she worked under him for a long time. Once that school was closed, she began to teach over at Thunderbird Elementary School in the pre-kinder department. And then later she retired, and she's been retired, but she's still very active in the community and in the church. My father, Belvin Taylor, he was a civil service worker, Brooks Army Hospital out at Fort Sam. He worked there until he retired, and later he passed away in 1972. But he was also an active member and supporter within the community toward West San Antonio Heights Elementary School. Now, one of the things that I remember the most is some of the people that I had gone to school with. And the strangest thing about coming out of a segregated neighborhood, you really had a sense of neighborhood. You had a sense of togetherness, and you had a sense of support. Because if you can imagine being the only African American in a classroom where everyone in that classroom has their own preconceived notions of how you're going to be and how you're going to act, they can expect of you. And this goes from, from the students to the teachers to the administrators, because this is all a very new experience for them as well as for us. And in most instances, we were the only ones. We were the only ones in certain classes. We were the only ones on certain teams. And it helped to build character, because you had to have a little confidence in your ability in order to be competitive, whether it be in the classroom or in the sports arena. And these are some of the things that we talked about back in the neighborhood as how we were going to perform and how we were going to leave on the district and the school. Some of the people that I've gone to school with were excellent athletes. Again, my brother, Belvin Taylor, he was a football, basketball star, and in fact, he remembers some of the things that Mr. Jordan, that you have impressed upon him. And I was talking to you earlier about one on how to not move your pivot foot.
Not move that pivot foot.
And he
of course,
said,
if you were a pro today, you move.
You can move that, yeah. You could double dribble and add dribble and everything. But he remembers that you taking the time to come pick them up at West San Antonio High, bring them to a gym that they had never played basketball in indoors before.
Yeah, you had outdoor courts.
Had outdoor courts, and actually we only had one ball for the boys in PE and one ball for the girls in PE, and you had to share. And if one went on flat, you had to be a little innovative and
see how you're going to plug it.
How we're going to
plug
it and patch it and plug it up and let's get it on. So, but he does remember that you coming, picking them up, taking them to a gym, teaching them some of the fundamentals. And one of those was that he remembers you stepping on his foot, telling him how not to move that foot when he pivots. And he to this day. So sometimes you never know the impression that you'll have on people.
I hope that was a good impression.
And I think that was a good impression because we laughed about it. And that was one of the things. But other people that I played with was a guy named Clyde Govan. Clyde Govan, another well-rounded athlete. He went to Holmes High School, played football, basketball. He ran track. He was in the Glee Club. He sung in
That's
the
right.
choir. Yeah,
I remember
that's
that.
correct. He sung in the choir. All really good person. And one of his teammates, or one of our teammates at the time, was Ralph Jackson. He also played basketball. Some of the other guys that I went to school with that were involved in sports in my grade level was Roy Jones. Actually, his uncle, Joe Jones.
Joe Jones played for me.
That's correct. His uncle, Joe Jones, played for you baseball, and his baseball, one of the baseballs that he threw in one of the games, I don't know if it's the district or what, if I'm not mistaken, still resides in the trophy case of John Marshall.
I wouldn't be surprised.
And he went on, and I think he went to Texas Southern University to play on a baseball scholarship. But that was Roy Jones Jr. was Joe Jones' nephew. And Roy eventually went to Holmes, good football player, started out in the band, but we ribbed him so much about playing in the band, he decided to go out for football in his junior year, and he actually played baseball and football and got a scholarship baseball, I believe. So he was a good athlete and a good musician. So, but we did give him a hard time about playing in the band when everybody else was
Well, did he
football.
keep playing in the band?
It was funny because when they would play football, he was a starter, and during halftime, he would run out of the locker room and he'd get his horn, and he would be the only guy in the band with shoulder pads and a football jersey on. But he would play at halftime in the band and play football.
Not great.
In the third and fourth quarter, you see. But those that you remember the most.
I think you mentioned you played in high school with John Thornton.
I played primarily basketball. I played with John Thornton, Rene Gonzalez, Mark.
But you had a lot of friends.
A lot of friends that I've met in high school.
In fact, when your mother taught at Thunderbird Hills Elementary, John Thornton lived not but a few blocks away.
Blocks from there.
Right on Ingram Road.
That's correct. Right off of Ingram Road. Yes, right off of Ingram Road. One of the things that I remember the most, I guess, you have good memories, you have bad memories. This was actually a bad memory, but it actually turned into a good memory. We were a pretty good basketball team during that time, and we were invited to tournaments up in cities such as Temple, Waco, Austin area. And one particular tournament we were involved with, we started out playing for Paul Taylor, who was the basketball coach, but unfortunately he passed away prematurely.
Died of leukemia.
Died of leukemia in his early 30s. And his assistant, Coach Faulkner, took over the team at the time. Well, because of the athletic program, we were pretty well versed in the art of basketball. We were not that impressive physically, but tactically and fundamentally sound we were.
And good athletes.
We were decent athletes. So we got invited to a Temple tournament up in Temple, Texas, and made the reservation, and we went there, and the hotel was right across the street from the gym in a pretty decent area. But when we pulled the bus in and the coach got off the bus, he went in to check us in. He came back, got on the bus, and drove off, and at this particular hotel. And no one really understood why.
What's going on?
What's going on? So we found a hotel, several miles down the road from the gym, and we got off and got situated, played the tournament and everything like that. Well, it really wasn't until a couple of months that I realized, me being the only African American on the team, and the reservations being made long distance by phone from a school that was known as a college prep type school and predominantly white school, they just assumed that everyone from that school was going to be white. They had no idea that we had one black on the team, and apparently that hotel did not house blacks at that time. So this was one instance in where I really felt a part of the team, not just I myself was, just because I was turned down from the hotel. The coach made the decision that if one team member was turned down, then no team members would stay. And there was the hotel's loss because they didn't make that money.
That's right.
But it was to my gain how
it was handled.
Working as a team can make a big difference on how you work together as human beings. And that was one of the better learning experiences that I had, even though it was not that great at the time. But it was one of the better learning experiences during that era.
You mentioned Joe Jones, and Joe played for me.
Yes.
And Joe was a fine young man.
Mm-hmm.
Really fine young man. And one time we went to a restaurant in a not too far away town. And we'd made arrangements, and we came back after we played the game. It was late at night, and we started to come in, and they said, no, you have this African American, and that you have to come back through the kitchen area. And the team said, Coach, he goes through that way, we all go through that way.
Mm-hmm.
And so people adjust to those things, and it is some togetherness and partnership and teaming that does take place.
That's correct. I agree with that.
And thank you for sharing that.
Mm-hmm.
Because it gave me a chance to talk about Joe.
Yeah, that's correct.
Tell me about some of your teachers. You mentioned Paul Taylor, and
Yeah.
what was Faulkner's name? Earl Faulkner?
I cannot
I can't come up
confirm
with it.
that,
Okay.
but I
Tell
just
me
can't-
about some of your other teachers and
Well,
coaches.
I guess some of the other teachers that I actually had memories of is a lady by the name of Mrs. Bungardner. Mrs. Bungardner was a social studies, primarily history teacher. She was what I could call today. She was a character. She and I never saw eye to eye, but she still impressed me because she didn't hold it against you just because you disagreed with her, but she challenged you to think. And whether I knew it or not, because I was disagreeing with her and because I knew that I had to have something to support my argument, it caused me to think. And the best part about learning, not knowing that you are learning, and it just becomes natural. So one of the things that I remember the most is in her history class is that she was very opinionated, and if you had a difference of opinion, you could speak up, but you'd have to be able to back it up. And that's what I would always prepare intentionally to attend her class, because I knew we were going to get into it. And every time the bell would ring to dismiss the class, she would always hold me back for 3 minutes just to smooth everything over so we could go at it again the next day. And and I think I gained a lot from that experience, not knowing at the time that it would probably benefit me in my adult years, being able to
adjust.
Being able to have support documentation in case I get into an argument with a client or so. But anyway, Mrs. Bungarn was one. One of my English teachers, Mrs. Rios.
Yes, Virginia Rios.
And she had gotten married again.
That's right. She married an artist.
And she took his name.
Well,
she was my English 4 teacher. And if people can, they have to. It's very hard to relate to nowadays because things have changed so much for the better. Although we still have a ways to go. But you got to remember, when I came out of West San Antonio Heights, there were preconceived notions as to how much African American students could, and what is their capability, what's their limits. And in order to gauge that, we were all lumped into one category, and that was pretty much remedial. And we were put into remedial classes, whether they wanted it or not. That's just the way it was until, I guess they felt, until we could find out who needs to go where. Well, fortunately, I was able to continue on, and I took some of the more accelerated classes, such as English 4, in which I was introduced to.
And at that time, you didn't have to take 4th year.
No, you didn't. And some of the things that we talked about, actually left a more academic type impression on you, more so than sports. As you know, sports was the big thing, but she was able to channel my interest into literature.
Her name is Mullen.
That's it. That's exactly right. That's right. Her name is Mullen. Virginia Mullen. But she was able to channel my interest into literature and the arts and reading and doing a lot of creative type writing. In addition to, I was still a jock. That by nature I was still a jock. But she was able to help channel that, some of my interest outside of sports into more of academic type nature. So I, remember her for that. And then I remember a couple of years after I'd gone to North Texas, I went to summer school at St. Mary's, and she was taking some classes or teaching a class over there, and I ran into her, and she still remembered me from high school, which, I didn't that impressive, but apparently, she hadn't forgotten who I was.
Good teachers don't forget good kids. Don't forget kids.
Yeah, that's one. But one of the things that I remember the most at Holmes High School, that during this particular time, there was within the whole entire student body, I guess there was no more than 20 or 30 blacks from Paradise Cove, the neighborhood that I grew up in. And there was not a lot of role models. There were not a lot of mentors. There were not a lot of books in the library that reflected images of African Americans. And one of the things, although we were a vast minority, one of the things that when I talked earlier about a sense of community, is we stuck together and we formed groups that went to the administration, and I wouldn't say forced, but the administration had to pay attention to us when we requested that some of more types of diverse literature be brought into this whole scheme of things. And I think it was an eye-opener, because if no one would have said anything, nothing would have happened. And it wasn't so much for us that we wanted to do it, but we knew that there were younger African Americans in Thunderbird Hills, Leon Valley, within all these areas are going to be fed into these high schools, and if you don't change now, it'll never change. But we also had the support of our parents, because we told them what we were going to do, and we were going to protest if there was, and during that time, you have to remember that it was a protesting time. And we were going to protest, we were going to stay out of class, we were going to make a statement until somebody paid it to us. And that, to me, was most memorable event for teenagers to take on that type of approach to try to change things.
How did the school react to it?
At first, they were a little resistant. Then they said, okay, let's start a council, but you have to come to school at 7 o'clock in the morning. That's why we, before class started. So we put together a council of students and teachers, and we had a good mix of minorities. We had African Americans, Hispanics, whites, and we even had a few Orientals, Asian, and we had the teachers. And there was confrontation, because some teachers were very resistant of having anything of that nature, because at that time it was perceived to be militant. So if you talked about anyone other than Booker T. Washington or W.E.B. Du Bois, and it was perceived to be, you're just militant troublemakers. If you wanted magazines in the library such as Ebony or Jet, that was a radical magazine. John H. Johnson, a radical shit. Now you look back on it and you say, how silly it is. But at the time, you had people who strongly believed.
You believed it.
They believed
and
this.
You thought it was necessary.
And we thought it was necessary. They thought it wasn't necessary. They were the adults, we were the children, and we should listen. Which we listened, but we didn't agree and we didn't back down. So a compromise. That's the first introduction to compromise. So we compromised, and eventually we got various books in the library. We studied American history from both viewpoints, and that's where I have to give a little credit to Ms. Pena, because although she had her ideas about how history evolved, we still incorporated from a different perspective of how history evolved and is perceived by both sides of the fence. And I think we were able to both learn from that experience.
Tell us, you graduated from Holmes. Tell us about your college and your work experience, please.
Well, when I graduated from Holmes, I went to San Antonio College. And it was kind of interesting, because when the basketball season started to grow to an end and we were all seniors, a lot of the guys on the team were being counseled about what colleges they were going to go to. And when I went to my counseling session, I was never introduced at that particular time to any colleges. And I was always questioning, well, why not?
Well, with Velvet and Lincoln, why not is a good question.
Yeah, and so unfortunately, the counselor at the time said, well, normally, and she used the term, you people, Normally you people don't do well in college. You probably should consider taking a trade, such as plumbing, paint and body work, electronics, or electricians, or something like that. And I'm saying, I take the same classes as my classmates. Most instances I'm making better grades than they are, but I still don't get an orientation on possibly going to college. So I just took it upon myself to apply at a community college, which was San Antonio College. And I got in, I got accepted, I did pretty good, and I actually started thinking about graduating from college. Well, in my family, historically, my mother was a teacher, and grandparents and their parents all held education very high on the hierarchy of things. And so I thought about going into teaching. So in order to do that, I had to go to a university. And UTSA at the time was not in existence. St. Mary's and Trinity were not affordable. So I wanted to go to a state university that took me totally away from my current environment so I could get some studying done. And I was reading through a book and I saw this gentleman's name, Henry Sisk, professor at North Texas State University. I said, well, if this guy wrote this book, it must be a pretty good program up there, so I think I'm going to go to North Texas. Never knew where it was. So I got a map, got a chart out, charted my way up I-35, and I applied, and they accepted. And I told my mother, I said, okay, I'm on my way to college at North Texas State. She said, where is that? I said, I'm not sure, but I'll call you when I get there.
It's a little bit north of Houston.
A little bit north, yeah, a little bit north of Austin, but I'm not sure. So I finally made it to North Texas, and I stayed there, graduated with a degree in secondary education. I did some substitute teaching for the Northside District, actually primarily at John Jay High School. And the strangest thing that happened one day is that a teacher came into the teacher lounge and said, I'm a new teacher here. I just left a job at USAA, and which is United Services Automobile Association, which is one of the major companies in San Antonio, if not the nation. It's a Fortune 300 company. And I said, well, if I'm not going to get a job as a teacher here, I don't want to substitute all my life. She left USAA. It must be a job opening at USAA, not knowing how huge the place was. So I went out that Friday, put in an application. They interviewed me on the spot. I had to take a written exam. Then I had to take a physical. And then that Monday morning, they called me to report for work in 2 weeks to go through a training class. And I had been there, a little over 29, almost 30 years before I retired in 06,
Wow.
07. And
You worked
been
in
there
the
every
investment management part of the
I
company?
basically started out with the insurance, property casualty, homeowner, homeowner car insurance and such. And after a short term there, I applied for a job in the investment management company, which deals with all of their mutual funds, securities, and things of this nature. And I received, several promotions during that time. Actually, it's kind of ironic. Even then, I was one of the first African-American male managers in the whole operation. And I was the first executive in the investment management company, say ever. And I'm sure there are more after I left, but at the time I was always the only one or the first. And one of the things that I kind of come to realize is there's nothing wrong with being the first of anything. What's wrong is being the only one, you see. So a lot of your opportunities should come not just because you're the first one, but it's, you really haven't accomplished anything if you can't bring in more. And so hopefully after I've left and from this period on, they'll have more executives, more management of not African Americans but of all minorities because of the diversity within the city, within our nation, and things of this nature. But now I'm pretty relaxed. I don't do anything that I don't want to do, and I've been very fortunate.
Tell me about your family.
Well, I'm married. I've been married for over 20 years. I'm married to a lady by the name of Linda Holly. She's a pediatrician here in San Antonio. She has one of the largest private pediatric office in San Antonio. She's a graduate of Baylor University, graduate of UT Health Science Center, and she and a partner of hers set up practice almost 20 years ago over on the east side of San Antonio with their primary objective to serve the indigent community within that area, to give them a specialized care. And it just blossomed from there. So she has offices on all sectors of sections of San Antonio now. And she does very well at what she does. So that's, well, I don't have any children, but that's been my life as it stands.
Well, Lon, this was really a good opportunity for us to sit down, and please remember me to your family, especially to your mother, to Belvin. I'm going to try and see if I can remember that pivot move here. And it's our pleasure.
Oh, my pleasure
You bet.
as well, anytime.
Thank you.
Thank you.